Hey, I wrote a book. An Armada of Cats Travels in Israel is now available to order as a paperback from Amazon and online from select local retailers. As we open this episode in 605 BCE, one King Jehoahaz is dying in an Egyptian prison while his brother Jehoiakim has been forced to spear point to pay tribute to Babylon or have his people exterminated. You can tell by the fact that I'm here to tell you this that he chose the former, but that doesn't mean life for the Jews got better. In 598, Egypt's successful resistance to Babylonian invasion inspired Jehoiakim to pull a fast one and switch allegiances again. But Judah wasn't Egypt, and when Jehoiakim was killed in the ensuing 3-month siege, the victorious Babylonians denied him even a proper Jewish burial. His son Jeconiah ruled for just 3 months before the Babylonians took him hostage and appointed his uncle Matthew as the new king under the regnal name Zedekiah. The prophets at this time were divided over which was the legitimate king. Ezekiel, who we'll come back to shortly, continued to identify the years by the reign of Jeconiah. Jeremiah, meanwhile, was Zedekiah's chief advisor. Jeremiah, incidentally, was also the worst. In any case, Zedekiah proved no more susceptible to Babylonian influence than hoped, and in 589 made an alliance with Egypt. He didn't have time to make use of it though before the Babylonians found out and besieged Jerusalem for 2.5 years. By the time the Babylonian army entered the city, almost every building had burned down. Most of the population had starved to death, and many of the survivors had resorted to cannibalism. Nebuchadnezzar responded to their rebellion in the most brutal way the Jewish people had yet experienced. First, his armies destroyed the temple. Then, King Zedekiah was forced to watch each of his sons' executions before having his eyes gouged out. Finally, the 4,000 surviving residents of Jerusalem were deported en masse to Babylon itself. The city left a desolate ruin. Without any civil or religious leadership, Jewish society functionally ceased to exist. The Babylonians did appoint a Jewish nobleman named Gedaliah to serve as governor, and while Judaism today views him pretty favorably for keeping at least some semblance of Jewish rule, the local populace at the time justifiably saw him as a traitor. He ruled for only a couple years before being assassinated, resulting in the flight of yet more Jews to Egypt. Jeremiah claims that Judah was completely devoid of Jews at this point, though historians now believe he was engaging in the earliest recorded no true Scotsman fallacy. He's the worst. Over in Babylon, the dispossessed Jewish ruling class were prisoners in a gilded cage. They weren't allowed to leave, but they were allowed to own land in the hope that it would force them to assimilate, kind of like what the US and Canada tried doing to American Indians in the modern era, up until... What the fuck? And hey, King Jeconiah was still kicking around. 18 years after the fall of Jerusalem, he was released from prison just long enough to outlive Uncle Zed and become the last living king of Judah. Jeremiah was unsurprisingly incredibly bitter about this and vowed that none of his descendants would hold the throne. But that didn't stop Jeconiah from founding a 1,500-year dynasty of rabbinically approved royal pretenders. Oh yeah, rabbis are a thing now. Well, kinda. They're called sages, and with the temple destroyed, they were the only religious authorities around, though they were also equivalent in modern terms to professors and lawyers, and one of them was Jeconiah's biggest fan, the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a priest by descent, but his philosophy and practices were decidedly unconventional. The book of Ezekiel, which yes, we're pretty sure he wrote, is responsible for some of the more bizarre episodes in the Bible, such as the thrones, angels taking the form of wheels within wheels covered in eyeballs. He's best known for expressing his devotion to God through theatrical stunts. On one occasion, he lay on his side for over a year, presumably taking bathroom breaks, living on bread made from every type of grain available, and also ate a copy of the Book of Deuteronomy to demonstrate its nourishing power. He was kind of an ancient Jewish Werner Herzog.
If I abandon this wall, I abandon this dream. I live or die by this wall.
But way more consequential than any of that was Ezekiel's approach to how to fight back against Babylonian assimilation. The book of Ezekiel is full of assurances that Jerusalem will rise again within the lifetimes of the people who saw its downfall. And this did happen, though Ezekiel himself died fairly young and didn't live to see it. But even within a few years of exile, Babylonian teaching was starting to make its way into Jewish oral tradition, namely Adam and Eve, Noah, and the Tower of Babel. The greatest fear was that the exiles' sons who had never known life in the motherland would marry Babylonian women and start worshipping Babylonian gods. Ezekiel's response was simple, elegant, and completely mind-blowing. That will never happen, because the Babylonian gods don't exist. Monotheism, everyone! We finally made it. Judaism as we know it is finally here. This period also saw the creation of an entirely new mythic patriarch in Abraham, the grandfather of OG patriarch Israel, who made his way out of Babylon and into the Promised Land, and so will you. And that's exactly what happened in 539 when Cyrus the Great of Persia came out of nowhere to conquer Media, Lydia, and Babylon, forming the biggest empire the world had ever known and allowed the Jews to return home. So suck it, Jeremiah. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, you can consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Otherwise, you can always like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.